Regardless of patriotic rhetoric and local sentiment, retroactively when looking back at younger Alex Jones, given his Christian compromise and disposition of being a college dropout, to him, in what seemed a sincere proclamation at the time to implicate a shadow government in what also occurred 2 years later after the 1993 bombing with the Oklahoma City bombing. In contrast to the overview on what we've uncovered with 1993, Alex Jones is not interested in correcting any of these false narratives he has promoted for nearly 2 decades, even when it comes to the most controversial implication involvements of all, the celebratory incident with the high-fiving dancing Israelis of 9/11, which is a widely accepted claim now by the truth movement, while Jones continues to marginalize and outright omit it.
I've got so many questions, but you are vindicated. This has got to be the 50th time the last 6 months on the radical Muslims celebrating, not just in New Jersey, but New York.
Discrediting 9/11 truth further than what damage he already done as a founder, ascribing to and promoting the hoax claim that a missile hit the Pentagon by way of non-credentialed skeptics. The kind of sloppy research that's gotten him in the mess he's in now with the Sandy Hook lawsuits against him. That's why in regarding his vicinity in 1995, Jones's conclusion and his first-hand research and publications on OKC should be equally re-examined and scrutinized just as they should for 9/11, since clearly he's gotten it wrong from the beginning with 1993. And it's prevalent now with the legal troubles he's gotten himself into, becoming more than just a loss of credibility and finance with these lawsuits against him over the Sandy Hook hoax he instigated. But what's also in jeopardy is his own mechanism to continue to perpetuate modern urban myths as a means to keep his operation afloat, with Sandy Hook being the catalyst of getting himself deplatformed on all the major social and multimedia sites. And now, with the public release of the deposition regarding those Sandy Hook lawsuits, has become very revealing of Jones' past and present.
The truth is, Mr. Jones, you were the first person in the world to make the false flag theory about Sandy Hook, and you did it before the bodies were even cold. That's the truth.
Or whether it's babies having their brains bashed out in incubators or WMDs, that I upfront questioned it because things from Operation Northwoods. Well, I mean, we always covered things from a perspective of caution. We were covering other people's reports and also questioning the historical fact that things like Operation Northwoods, a government plan to stage mass shootings in the U.S. Kennedy said no to the plan, but the chairman of the Joint Chiefs had green-lighted it. And so because of things like that, we are forced to then question these events. And I think that's, it's just part of the process in this country.
Notice how Jones uses Operation Northwoods as his get-out-of-jail card, or more like confirmation bias card, wielding this conventional declassified 1962 plan, which was never close to manifesting, as his excuse as to why he instigated Sandy Hook hoax theories, when anyone who's classically followed 9/11 truth knows that Operation Northwoods is definitively Jones's original talking point to defend his past outlandish claims on who and how 9/11 was carried out. Such an accusation is both illogical and unusual given his age and position of being an independent media source, given the resources and opportunity to analyze basic history and recent news, when such a notion that 9/11 was an Operation Northwoods type event is laughable, when there's the crimes of Ramzi Youssef past the 1993 bombing, regardless of what insidious planners in the government of yesteryear were in position, or how sensational of a plan it sounded. All the history that surrounds 9/11, in addition to having previously aided the Mujahideen, gives no rhyme, no reason to disrupt the blatant pattern to specific urban international terrorism, equated as a government conspiracy by default, when there's simply the Bojinka plot. And with drafting up Operation Northwoods, which is primarily in maritime terms a foreign attack to invoke a similar response to an earlier false flag attack in Cuba. Remember the USS Maine? When considering not only innovation, but that a small part of the plan was using one drone aircraft meant to look like a passenger plane, as well as other fighter planes. And even though there is a reference to hijacking, the ultimate goal was mainly to make it appear that the passenger plane was shot down, by even blowing it up as an option. But none of it has to do with the actual terms of hijacking the plane from within inside the craft, by Cuban terrorists or even kamikaze, but in an attempt to provoking or seizing the aircraft, basically intercepting it with mock Cuban warplanes, as detailed within the documents about making the appearance that the passenger plane with American college students would be harassed by other duplicate aircraft painted to look like Cuban MiGs, added with transmitting a Mayday message stating that they were under attack, confusing as it might sound. When looking at things conventionally and the time of innovation, it's not hard to figure out if you do some basic research on the history of hijackings, when in actuality before they were called hijackings, they were called skyjackings, and were all either cases of robbery or criminals seeking to escape or political asylum, which in 1962, when Northwoods was drafted up, hijackings was a relatively recent phenomenon and rarely happened particularly in the manners of terrorism, by attempting or threatening to destroy the aircraft, which in fact, in technical terms, the first terrorist hijacking with the intent to destroy an airliner and all its passengers was carried out in the same provocation intent like Northwoods, but by Israeli warplanes 8 years before, in 1954, under the orders of General Moshe Dayan, where the IDF intercepted and seized a Syrian airliner, forcing it to land, holding everyone inside as hostages in exchange to get Israeli prisoners freed from Damascus. And if that seems outdated or not strikingly similar enough to 9/11, then consider the consequence of those actions carried out by IDF and its foundation, when ironically, just 8 years later in September of 1970, there's the Dawson's Field hijackings, where 4 out of 5 planes are successfully hijacked by the Black September and landed in Jordan, where luckily no passengers were killed, but the planes were blown up by explosives. And yet, somehow, Alex Jones became the historian on terrorism and false flags, the authority of 9/11 Truth?
Sandy Hook, before I was ever sued, lost money. 9/11 Truth lost me almost all my radio stations and lost money. Those type of really controversial stands, people don't like them, and they have crippled us before these lawsuits.
That rationale is simply laughable. Jones couldn't have lost money over 9/11 Truth when he had gone beyond Bush's 2 terms promoting it, producing several films, pressing books, t-shirts, and other merchandise marketed with 9/11 in the title. It is practically the crisis, along with the advent of social media, that eventually springboarded his network into major recognition. If Alex Jones lost so much money, then why did he go even further, co-opting the most popular of 9/11 Truth films and produces a third and contemporary version of Loose Change, which again has all been the base of his own fear cult doctrine, that he and his loyal believers still to this day equate 9/11 to Operation Northwoods. Alex Jones is nothing but an incompetent liar, and he disturbingly has the largest audience in alternative media. And because of that, combined with his ego, he is the victim of his own narratives that has projected a tremendous mistrust in American society today and throughout other dissidents globally.
So you have to look at the agenda behind things. You have to balance things about why has the mainstream media lied so much, why have governments lied so much, the fact that the public doesn't believe what they're told anymore. And it really is the fact that we've allowed the government and institutions to become so corrupt that people lost any compass of what's real. And I myself have, almost had like a form of psychosis. I genuinely questioned, and I think the government and media that's been caught lying so much has created an atmosphere where people don't know what's true.
So you do not believe that you've done an outrageous wrong to these parents?
I've not done an outrageous wrong to the parents.
If you can be that callous and clumsy with real victims' family members, imagine how he truly sees those survivors, victims' families, and those who still want accountability for 9/11.